Hello, my name is Tom and welcome to my channel Integral Views. So in the UK, our Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, has resigned for various reasons that we won't get into in this video. But it's left a gap in the cabinet, in the government in the UK, and there's been a reshuffling with various people moving to different roles. Yvette Cooper, our previous Home Secretary, has left. She's become Foreign Secretary, replacing David Lammy. So musical chairs basically, but somebody new has come into the Home Secretary role, and that is Shabana Mahmood. And so I wanted to get sort of understanding and have a think about how that could play out for the country. It's a very critical role, so I want to get an understanding of Shabana and sort of just give my opinion on how I think it's going to play out. In this video, I'm going to talk about Shabana Mahmood, a new Home Secretary in the UK. And so I'm going to talk about what a Home Secretary even is, so why is it important at all? And then who is Shabana Mahmood, Shabana's political activity up to this point, and then how it could play out. And finally, I will close with my opinion. So to understand why this is such an important role, and why it's good for us to get an understanding of how it may play out, we need to understand what the Home Secretary does. So we'll go through quick what that is. So it's one of the four great offices of state. So those are the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary, Chancellor of the Exchequer, and the Home Secretary. And it's head of the Home Office, right? And so that the Home Office and the Home Secretary are responsible for visas, immigration, security services, and also manage policy on drugs, counter-terrorism, and immigration. So this is really important at the moment because we have a very sort of amplified or very contentious debate around illegal immigration, and our previous Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, essentially failed, as far as I'm concerned, to really get control of the situation, although they're doing various things in government. But, this is a very highly contentious and highly emotional topic in the UK that's sort of given rise to the Reform Party. That's a new political party who's leading in the polls right now. So it's a critical role, and actually it's a massive vote of confidence for Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, to put Shabana into that role. Yep. So we will next we're going to look at who Shabana Mahmood even is, get an understanding of her and her sort of history. So let's get an understanding of who Shabana Mahmood is. So she's one of the first female Muslim MPs ever. She's a Member of Parliament for Birmingham Ladywood since 2010, so quite a long time, a lot of experience in Parliament. She identifies as a small c Conservative and as belonging to the socially conservative Blue Labour faction of the Labour Party. So that's really interesting. She's on the Conservative side of the Labour Party, and I think that speaks volumes. And I think you can kind of see that in her voting record, which we'll get into. So she graduated with a degree in law from Lincoln College, Oxford, and went on to complete the bar vocational course at Inns Court School of Law. So she's a lawyer, as many politicians seem to be. Keir Starmer is a human rights lawyer as well. After the 2015 general election, Mahmood was promoted to the Shadow Cabinet and served as Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury in the interim Shadow Cabinet of Harriet Harman. Okay, so that's some experience in the Shadow Cabinet. So the Shadow Cabinet is basically when another political party is in office, but you're kind of the shadow. You're the second most voted for political party, right? So you're not actually in government. Your party's not in government, but you still have like a cabinet, and it's called Shadow Cabinet. So you'd have, there'd be a Home Secretary who's actually in charge of the Home Office, like Shabana Mahmood now is. But then you also have like a shadow Home Secretary that's from a different political party that's not in power, and their job is basically to kind of criticise you in the House of Commons, and to basically kind of hold you to account and make sure you're doing the right thing and doing your job well. Quite a good system, actually. So following Labour's victory in 2024 general election, Mahmood was appointed Lord Chancellor and Secretary of State for Justice in the Starmer ministry. So that's in Keir Starmer's government. Okay, that's kind of a background on Shabana Mahmood, but now we're just going to have a look at her political activity, and have a look at how she's voted to get an understanding of how it's likely she's going to approach the new Home Secretary role. Let's get right into that next. Okay, so Shabana's political activity. We're just going to look at a few select pieces of Shabana's history politically. So following Jeremy Corbyn's election as Labour leader, Mahmood resigned from the position and declined to serve in Corbyn's shadow cabinet. So she was in the shadow cabinet in Labour before, but when Jeremy Corbyn was elected, she resigned. That's really interesting and it gives us a lot of information around her political leaning. So Jeremy Corbyn is like a really far left politician, and for a time he was the leader of the Labour Party, and he was even in an election which he lost to Theresa May from the Conservatives. But he's very far left, right? And now he's got his own party. So Labour overall are seeing this splitting of the Labour Party between what you'd call, I guess, more centrist Labour politicians, more Blairite, right, more like Tony Blair type Labour politicians, and then you've got the far left of the party, and they're splitting off at the moment. Jeremy Corbyn is one of those, and they're basically socialists, right? And so now they've split off and they've got their own party. Okay, as Secretary of State for Justice in Starmer's ministry, she implemented an early release scheme for thousands of prisoners to reduce prison overcrowding. My opinion is that I think she did a good job. So in her role as Secretary of State for Justice, she was faced with this major prison overcrowding epidemic, and I saw an interview with her and Michael Gove. It's on YouTube, actually. Michael Gove and Shabana Mahmood, and it was The Spectator, and it was really interesting because she went into quite a lot of detail. And what it showed to me is that she's she really understands her brief, so she really gets to understand the area that she covers. She implemented an early release scheme, and that was to free up prison space. This is a really controversial one because a lot of people are arrested in the UK, and some of them do serve prison time for posts on X that are kind of subjective and you're not really sure. Well, basically the consensus across the country pretty much is that it's really heavy-handed. So, this was a really controversial situation. That you had at the same time this cracking down on online speech on X and people going to prison for it, and that coincided with certain events in the UK. But basically, at the same time as that, you had people being released from prison early, right? So they were released from prison early to free up prison space. So, yeah, it's not a great look, to be honest. But I think really it was an endemic problem. So the prison overcrowding was a problem that was pre-existing, even before the Labour government. So I think that she was dealing with that in any way that she could, and she probably already had plans to deal with overcrowding in this way, but the optics weren't great. So during Shabana's time as the Secretary for Justice, she received guidance from the sentencing committee, that usually would just go straight in and would basically determine the process of the sentences that people receive for different crimes, and also pre-sentencing arrangements. And effectively, the arrangements that were put forward to Shabana were unfairly treating specifically white men, and I think specifically white Christian men and atheist men. So, it had this kind of overview of minorities and men were basically excluded. So what I'm showing here on screen is an overview of the pre-sentence report. So these were the guidelines that Shabana got. And effectively you can see in here that there are various categories. So you've got from an ethnic minority, cultural minority, or faith minority, young adult, and then pregnant, postnatal, etc. Okay. And basically these groups, everything here, they were given these pre-sentence reports, and that makes it more likely that they'd basically get a more lenient sentence. So this came into public consciousness, and it was basically clearly unfair, and it played perfectly into the online narrative regarding two-tier justice and two-tier care. That was very popular. And it happened, at the time that was really rising in popularity. So, but yeah, right. So the important thing here is that Shabana, when this came to her, she was, first of all, and I remember seeing it at the time, first of all, she was really clear in the Houses of Commons. She was really clear that it's not right. And she did it immediately as well. So it came up and she immediately said, this isn't right. And then she really quickly took action to squash it, basically. And she did it really effectively. So I think she did a really fantastic job with that. And it could have blown up and it could have carried on and dragged on and been in the headlines for months, right? But what she did basically was she changed the law so that the Secretary of State for Justice would have to approve sentencing guidelines personally. So she dealt with it, right? And she dealt with it in a way that I think was right. So a few other things. So we already know Shabana Mahmood is a practicing Muslim, and she swore her oath of parliamentary office on the Quran, which is, various other religious people who follow other religions will do similar on other holy books like the Bhagavad Gita for Hindus. So this is a practice in Parliament in the UK. So the reason that I mention this is because online everybody's putting images of this and basically saying this is an example of where, hey, this is terrible, Islam's taking over our parliament, and this is just the next step in that creeping power struggle. So that's why I mention it. Okay, so I want to now just talk about how it could play out. So there's various different ways that it could play out, but I want to just sort of discuss it a little bit. So this is a really critical role, and it's a really interesting appointment from my perspective for various reasons. And I think it could go one of two ways, right? Basically, what I think is that this is raising the stakes. Fundamentally, this is Keir Starmer raising the stakes because, he will be aware that having a Muslim in charge of the Home Office, when we're seeing a lot of Islamic migration and a lot of the the discussions around the erosion of our national culture in the UK, it is certainly optics that he will have considered. And I think that's intentional, right? And it's really interesting because I think that there's a real potential for this to be a political masterstroke. And the reason why, and so yeah, people say that, but I'll explain why, in my opinion. Because there's two issues that are massive in UK politics at the moment. Well, it's really the same issue, right? But so basically the big issue is that's going on. It's almost like a cultural crisis. And see it every day on TV, see it non-stop conversation about this, because we have a massive illegal migration problem in the UK. Many other countries do as well. But in the UK, we really have a major illegal migration problem. And that's really undermining the social contract in the UK for migrants and for native citizens. It undermines the whole system, basically. It makes a mockery of the rules-based system. We're paying taxes for people that we can't get rid of, who just basically came to our country. And often we don't know anything about them whatsoever. They have no documentation and they'll play the system. Of course, there are genuine asylum seekers, but really, we shouldn't be having people come over to the UK on boats and just coming straight through our border. It's just a real... it's like this is a failure of the system that is really obvious, and people can't avoid it anymore, you know. So people are really feel extremely strongly about this, extremely strongly. It's a one issue vote type thing. So people will vote for a party no matter what they say about anything else, basically, if they do the right thing on this front. If they do the right thing on illegal migration and legal migration, reducing it, and getting rid of illegal migration altogether, then people will vote for that party. And we see that in the rise of Reform, which is a political party in the UK. We also have Advance UK with Ben Habib. We also have Restore Britain, which is a movement that's growing in pace. So, you know, this is a massive political movement, right? It's the majority view in the UK. So this role is super critical. Now, when you go really far into the extremes of that area, of that kind of political leaning, you get these ethno-nationalists that are increasingly prevalent online, who will say, you know, we have to have a nation that is ethnically pure and homogenous. So they don't like any other culture, any other ethnicity in the UK, and they're pretty extreme, right? So racists, basically, okay? And so the interesting thing, what I really want to get across about this appointment with Keir Starmer's, is that Shabana is pretty strong on this. So everything she said about this to date has been, you know, basically along the lines of conservative talking points, that we really need to address this. It's a really serious problem. And I think she's already acting in that, you know, in that vein, which we'll get into. But, you know, effectively, the reason this is such a potentially good move is that if she solves this massive cultural crisis in the UK, and it's solved by a Muslim, and it's properly solved, and no one else seems to have been able to solve it in the past, well, then you just completely undercut. Not only do you undercut Reform's single topic, basically single issue, because let's face it, like Reform are basically the reason they're leading in the polls is on this issue almost entirely. Not completely. There are other things, I get it, right? But it's a major one. So it not only removes that from Reform, but it also completely undercuts the arguments of the ethno-nationalists, even though their arguments make no sense in the first place, and they've been undercut in many different ways. But it's just like, what I'm saying is, there's some kind of poetic justice, or there's something really cool about it. So from my point of view, I feel like, you know, I really want her to succeed. Really, I think more than essentially any other political situation, because I think Reform are kind of grifters. I'm ranting a bit now, right? But I think Reform are probably incompetent, really, overall, and inexperienced. And I think that they would just completely wreck many different things in the UK. I don't think that they would be good for the UK. So if she can prevent that and also deal with a massive problem for the long term, it would just be so beneficial for the country, because it would really bring people together as well, because of, you know, because of who she is and her history and her religion. All right, but she's not off to a great start. Not her fault, but 1,100 illegal migrants arrived during her first day in office. So that's not a great start, right? But of course, not her fault. You can't just deal with the problem in a single day, or not even a single day. So it was her first day. Let's cut her some slack, right? But yeah, so my concern though is that if she fails, it's just going to inflame tensions even more. And that's why I say Keir Starmer's raising the stakes. Because if she fails, then people will be even more emboldened to say, oh, well, there you go. You know, a Muslim went into Home Secretary, and of course she didn't solve this. Of course she did this. It was all a plan. It's all part of the, you know, the plan to eradicate sort of ethnically pure British people, whatever that is. So, yeah, I don't know. I think Keir Starmer's raised the stakes. So we can see examples of Shabana wanting to address this situation and take a pretty hardline stance on it already appearing almost immediately. I think even on the day that she was announced, we saw this post. Britain's most senior police officer, Mark Rowley, is to present the new Home Secretary with proposed law changes within weeks so officers can stop policing tweets. Yeah, please. I think you've got better stuff to do. So I think that that's, an example of her approach overall. Just want to cover quickly that in the past, Shabana has made comments about the ECHR. I won't go into detail about this, but basically the ECHR is it's the European Convention on Human Rights, to which the UK is a signatory, and we've embedded ECHR legislation within our legislation, the Human Rights Act 1998, I think it is. Shabana has made comments about this in the past that should be informative with regard to what she'll likely do in this area. She called for reforms to how Article 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights is applied in immigration cases, stating that the right to family life has in some instances been used in ways that undermine public confidence in the rule of law. Well, it's clearly and obviously the case. She's absolutely right. But because of how extreme parts of our establishment have become, even saying that is controversial. So delivering a speech in the Council of Europe's Committee of Ministers in Strasbourg today, Mahmood said the convention must evolve to meet modern challenges, particularly in relation to immigration and criminal justice. She emphasised that the UK remains committed to the convention, but warned that the application of rights must not conflict with the principle of fairness or disrupt legitimate government functions. So really interesting, because in that she's saying, basically, in those statements, what she's actually saying really is that as it is applied right now, it is disrupting legitimate government functions, and it is in conflict with the principle of fairness. Yeah, so and she's right. It completely clearly is, and everybody knows that it is. So I think that's a good sign, and I think that it's kind of really clear her views on this, and I don't think those views are just like recent. I think she's got a track record of having these kinds of more conservative views. So, from within a Labour context, more conservative. So we have also seen that since Shabana has been in office as the Home Secretary, which is not very long, we've already seen announcements that she's moving to have illegal migrants put into disused military bases, which is, a step in the right direction in my opinion. So I think that these moves they sort of build a picture of where she's heading with this. All right, so on to my opinion on the topic. I think that Shabana's going to do everything in her power, and I think that she is an incredibly competent, intelligent individual. You can kind of see that, and I've watched quite a lot of videos of her in the Houses of Commons and also in interviews. So my opinion of her is basically that she's really smart and really capable, probably one of our most intelligent and capable politicians at the moment in the House of Commons. And also she's kind of conservative from a Labour standpoint, right? So I think that it's quite clear that she really wants to address this, and I think that Keir Starmer, with him, it became completely clear that his direction of travel was just unsustainable. I mean, Labour have dropped to I think 11% support in the polls, 70% disapproval rating, all around these issues, right? All around this stuff, and immediately Shabana goes in and goes, stop policing tweets and let's deal with this migration issue. We're going to use military bases, and there's going to be rolling out of more and more things like that. That's what I think, and I think that that's fantastic. That's amazing for the country. I think it could really help Labour and deal with something that they made a massive mistake on, because Labour, when they came into power, the first thing that they did was they got rid of the Illegal Migration Act 2023 that Suella Braverman from the previous Conservative Party brought into law, right? And what that meant what that legislation did when it was in effect, it was from 2023 to like 2024. What that did basically was it prevented migrants who used irregular routes from claiming asylum, and hence they started building up in hotels. And Labour just got rid of that completely. Then they got rid of the Rwanda plan and they replaced it with some nonsense about smashing gangs or whatever else. And they've basically just been messing around ever since. Because fundamentally, their view on this topic is completely wrong. And it's not just their view. Actually, Keir Starmer's entire political career, not political, his career up to this point, is being a human rights lawyer, which is applying international global law, right? Which is basically seen as above national law, which is kind of the problem. It's a big part of the problems we've got in the UK. And then he appointed Lord Hermer into an Attorney General role, and he's another career human rights lawyer. So they clearly had a direction of travel, which was, let these poor people in, process them, start churning through them, approving, getting them to work in the economy. We'll get rid of the hotels because we'll move them into HMO, social housing, etc. It will cost us less, and then it will help grow the economy. We'll see GDP growth, and that will be the problem solved. But no, completely wrong. Wrong from the beginning. You can't do that. You can't have a country with essentially completely open borders. Anyone who can get here on a dinghy can stay. I mean, it's insane. Clearly insane. And it was like a really big mistake that they made early on, Labour. All right, but yeah, I think Shabana, I think that her views differ, and they differ in the right way that is more aligned with public opinion on this controversial topic. And I think that she's going to be really effective. But the real worry I've got is that without significant changes to our human rights law, that is basically determined by the ECHR, Human Rights Law 1998, what can we really do, right? What are you move them to military bases and then what? Just indefinitely? They're in military bases? Are they locked in them or not? Is it just housing? It's kind of, what's the plan, Because at the moment it is impossible, effectively, for us to deport people to Afghanistan. So if you get here from Afghanistan, you will stay here. We don't deport anyone from Afghanistan at all. No matter what they say, we don't. Because human rights law protects people from being deported to Afghanistan because it's run by the Taliban. So their rights take precedent, the rights of the people who've come here illegally, right? And so we need a legal mechanism. We need a legal change that will allow us to take the actions we need to take, right? And I think that Shabana's comments on the ECHR and Article 8 of it are interesting, because what it does is it hints at her acknowledging that we need a legal solution to this. So the roadblocks are actually major legal roadblocks in really core legislation. By the way, that legislation is so core in the UK that it's basically underpins our entire framework of the Good Friday Agreement with Northern Ireland and devolution arrangements with Wales and Scotland. So it's kind of difficult to unpick, and it's like the basis of lots and lots of other law that's just kind of stacked on top of it, right? So when you're at that level, how do you go back? How do you backtrack? But we got to backtrack big time. And I prefer Keir Starmer, who's a human rights lawyer, knows what he's doing in law, right? And Shabana, who also is a lawyer and knows what she's doing. And maybe Lord Hermer, our Attorney General as well, who knows what he's doing. I'd prefer these people to go in and surgically change what we need to change, right? And if that means getting ECHR to be updated, or it means the way that we apply it in an interim solution, right, then that's better than having reform come in and go, oh, we're just going to tear it all apart, and then we don't know what the consequences are. We were in massive legal battles with Northern Ireland for years. It's like, come on. So I think, personally, I think she's a great person for the job. I'm really happy that she was appointed into that role. I think it's a smart move by Keir Starmer. And I really, really, really hope that she does a good job and is successful. So I just wish her all the best. I think it's going to be incredibly difficult. I think she wants to solve it. It's going to be really difficult. So yeah, just hope that she can manage it. All right, so that's it for this video. thank you very much for watching. I did ramble a little bit there, but I've got my opinions on it. I wanted to share them. All right, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, and also go follow me on X. Thank you. See ya.